You know that moment when you share some super exciting news? Maybe about a relationship, a career move, a big move in general, and then someone immediately jumps in with their horror story. Oh, you're starting a business? Let me tell you about my cousin who lost everything when she started a business. Oh, getting married? You're just signing up for misery. Oh, that big dream you have? Honestly, in today's economy, I don't think that's possible. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about why I think that these projections and stories that people tell us affect us so deeply. And more importantly, how to stop letting other people's experiences write your story. And quite frankly, control your life before you have even lived it. Hey there, fellow travelers, and welcome back to Get In You Are Driving, where we talk about how to take the wheel in life's journey. I'm your host, Maria, and I'm here to remind you that you have so much more control over your life than you think you do. Because when you think about it, life is a lot like driving, from sudden detours to unexpected breakdowns. And essentially, in this podcast, we'll uncover the many lessons that I believe life teaches us and akin that to what it's like when you're driving on the road. What I always want you to remember, though, is we get to choose our attitude, our direction, and our response. Sure, the road might get rough, and many times it does feel like we're being thrown into the passenger seat, but the truth always is that you are the one driving and you get to be in control. And sometimes all you need is the courage to get in your car day after day and to continue on driving. So, hello, everybody. We just finished the Driver's Ed series, and these first 5 podcast episodes were super important to me because they were very foundational of how I wanted the podcast to go. And now we're going to go into, I know I said this before, but I don't expect anyone to remember that this podcast's core framework of what I discuss will follow what I call different themes that all fall under life's driving lessons. For example, a couple themes could be navigation stories, wisdom from the road, unexpected detours. This is just to name a few, but that's kind of how I'm going to do the structure of this. Because to me, it's all about taking those everyday driving experiences that we all know and using them to understand life a little bit better. So, anyways, I just wanted to say that in today's episode, the theme is actually going to be objects in your mirror. Like that little warning sign on the side mirror. I'm currently filming this in Spain because I do live in Spain. And I was realizing on my walk the other day, they don't say that here on the car mirrors. There is no objects seem closer. So maybe that's just a US thing. I don't know if you're listening from another country. Does your country put this on the mirror? Because in the US it does. So, anyways, it's the little objects in mirror are closer than they appear. And I wanted this to be the theme today because I think that sometimes, just like those mirrors can distort our view of what's behind us when we're driving, other people's stories and opinions can distort our view of what's ahead of us. And they can make our fears look so much bigger than they are. They can make our challenges seem so much more overwhelming than they really are. And they can make our dreams feel a lot further away. So let's get into today's episode. Guys, I am still going to have my laptop very handy and look down at it a lot. I've been watching so many podcasts and I have been mesmerized at the people that are just like talking the whole time. Like maybe they edit it out in their editing. I don't know, but I'm like, I have to look at my laptop or this would literally take me 5 hours to film. So I'm sorry. I don't want it to seem impersonal and me just constantly looking down. This isn't a problem if you're not watching on YouTube. But anyways, so all right, let's get let's get into it. If you're a regular listener, I hope you are. You've probably heard me say something that may seem a little bit contradictory, but I always say, and I will continue on saying it. And I actually have a disclaimer at the very end about this written on all of my podcasts that I put up, which is do not ever, ever, ever take what I say at face value. I want you to always think about information for yourself from your own perspective. And you might be wondering, why would someone with a podcast sharing their thoughts and experiences tell you to not automatically accept what they're saying? Well, here's why. In today's episode, we're going to get right to the heart of that message because this is what I believe to be the truth. I am not here to be another voice telling you what to think or how to think. I'm here to be a fellow traveler and tell you about what I have learned through my experiences of being behind my own wheel in my life, while also fully recognizing that you are in your own car on your own journey with your own destination, and that's going to be completely different from mine. But what I really essentially think podcasts and people sharing their stories are about is being able to learn from people's stories, but realizing that it's not yours. And also, again, just not taking what I say at face value because I don't know everything. I'm Maria. I'm learning every single day. All right. And this brings me to a story that really I think will help me drive this point home. I want to share something personal that has actually really opened my eyes to something very profound about life in general and like this theme that we're going to talk about today. So, back when I was a senior in my senior year of college and I was about to graduate with my degree in speech pathology, I was actually one of the top students in my cohort. It's not something that I share a lot, but I was. And everybody, like I mean, absolutely everybody in my cohort was headed off to grad school. And it's all our professors talked about was this is your next step. Because if you know anything about speech pathology, you can just do 4 years and be an assistant. But if you actually want to be your own speech pathologist, you have to do 2 years of a master. And then, of course, if you want to be a doctor and get your PhD, you can do that. So, this is the thing. Is everybody was headed off to grad school and it was just what everybody did, right? It was the normal next step. It was the expected next step. It was the safe route. And I had this pull, this knowing in my own self that I just needed to do something else. I wasn't sure what that was, but I was feeling extreme burnout. I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And I just knew that I can't continue forward with this. Even though I did actually highly enjoy it, I just wasn't naturally gifted at speech pathology. And I felt like it would have been a life of a constant uphill battle for me. And again, I was already experiencing so much burnout. I didn't want to get in debt and I just didn't want to study anymore. I'm really not an academically inclined person. I do like to think a lot. I hate academics though. So I just slowly started to think of what else to do. And at the time, one friend recommended to me to go to Italy. My first thought was, what the frick am I going to do in Italy? But I don't know. It kind of like opened up my mind to something else to do. So I started thinking about the possibility of this. I had thought about Europe before, but I never thought about it seriously. But again, I had this inclination. I didn't want to continue on with grad school. And I thought about Spain because at the time I had a very good friend here. Still, we're very good friends. And I had one cousin here. And I thought to myself, like, okay, what about like Spain? And even though I didn't have a very concrete plan, I looked into things that I could do in Spain. And honestly, I decided to come. Like, I decided, forget grad school. I don't want to do it. I know that it's not for me. I'm going to move to Europe. I'm probably going to end up doing something very basic that most Americans did when I came here, which I did, which was teach English. And I was very confident in that decision. Now, when it came time to tell people about this decision, let's just say their reactions were interesting to say the least. I'll never forget when my favorite professor looked at me when I told her, and she smiled at me and she said, "Oh, Maria, you're giving me such eat, pray, love vibes. I love it." And I do think that she meant well, but with her tone, there was this subtle hint of, "Oh, sweetie, what are you doing?" And I was like, you know what? I accept that. And I had to somehow realize and understand that I was choosing a different path. And that meant that I was like, how do I put it? That was her reaction. That was a lot of my cohort's reaction. People just didn't understand what the frick I was doing. And to be quite honest, I didn't fully understand it myself. I just knew it's what I had to do for myself. But again, a lot of people came into conversations with me of like, choosing a different path, especially this path of moving to Europe, right, was me choosing some frivolous adventure instead of making a real decision about my life. Like whether or not people meant to do that in conversations with me, I could tell in their tone and their body language. That's kind of what they were saying in the underlying point. But here's what I've come to understand since then. And honestly, since every decision I have made since then, because this is something very, very continual, and this is huge, so I really want you to listen. When people react to our choices, they're not actually seeing our path, right? So they're looking at it through their own rear view mirror filled with their own experiences, their own fears, their own what ifs. And also, I was reading this in the book, The Let Them Theory by Mel Robbins. Amazing. Everyone should read this book. Super practical, super helpful. And she was saying they're seeing it from their framework. I forget there was another word here, but she was saying how we all see things through our framework of mind. And I really thought that was very helpful to think of as well, that we're going to see it through, again, our experiences, our reactions with these things. So think about it like this: we're all driving our own cars, right? But sometimes we let other people's GPS coordinates override our own internal navigation system. They're calling out directions based off of roads they've traveled, accidents they've had, traffic they've encountered. But here's the thing: they're giving directions for their journey, not yours. There's something really fascinating here that I want to share with you, and it's called something like projection. This is when someone actually, sorry, let's backtrack. So, I want to talk about something called projection, and this is very human. I think you all know where I'm getting with this. It's something that's very messy, but all of us humans do it. Like, I don't want to make anybody out to be a bad guy. And it's actually a concept that Freud and Jung kind of came up with. And it's called psychological projection. And I'm going to read this because this is when someone unconsciously attributes their emotions, insecurities, or experiences onto others, assuming that what they feel or believe must be true for someone else. I got this from the neuropsychoses of defense. I think that's what it's called. So think about it like this: we're all driving our own cars on our own journey. But here's what's fascinating: when someone gives us directions or advice, they're not really giving us directions based off of our map. They're giving us directions based off of, again, roads they've traveled, accidents they've had, traffic they've encountered. And what's so important to remember when you're making these very individualistic choices for yourself is that when people share their opinions or react to our choices, again, they're not really seeing our journey. They're seeing it from their framework of reference. They're seeing their past trips replayed in their mind. Maybe my professor was seeing a friend that she knew that did the same thing I did and it ended up terribly, right? I don't know. But what I want you to remember is that they are different drivers with different skills. And something that I have discovered, and what I really want you to hear today, is that this happens whether people mean well or not. I don't want you to think I'm saying people have these horrible, malicious intentions. I think it's just because it's not because they're trying to hold us back or because they don't believe in us. I think it's because this is how we as humans make sense of our world. We navigate new territory by using the maps we've already drawn through our own experiences. Like, no matter how objective we try to be as human beings, we kind of are always subjective and we are always relating it back to us. And when you think about it, that's that's really selfish, but it is what we're doing. And I think part of us just can't help that. So again, when someone warns you about a dangerous road ahead, when people were warning me about going to Spain and all these things I could encounter, they're actually really telling you about maybe something that happened to them on their journey. But again, you're in a different car and you're a different person. Your driving skills are different. The weather is going to be different for you. The road itself might have completely changed. I'm making a lot of road analogies, but I assume you understand that I'm relating this to life. But I think this is where it gets really interesting. And this is the part that honestly changed everything for me personally. And once you understand this projection thing that people do unconsciously, as I defined, it's incredibly freeing. And I think that when you realize that people's opinions pretty much 98% of the time are really just projections of their own experiences, you start to understand that you have so much power over your life. And I also think that you start to have compassion for people because when you think about it on a deeper way, instead of getting offended that they told you your business is going to fail, you realize, oh, maybe they did have a business and it failed and that was really hard on them. And again, you see it more from compassion than, oh my gosh, she's attacking me and telling me my business idea won't work out. Like, it just helps you see people for their stories and for a whole human being and so many more things. So, I want you to think about if there's ever been times where you have hesitated taking a certain exit on your life's highway because someone else told you about the terrible traffic they encountered there. I'm sure it's happened to you. I think it's happened to all of us. I mean, how many dreams have you put in park because someone else's journey on that road didn't work out? But what if, and this is the big question that I want you to sit with, is what if their traffic isn't your traffic? And what if their road conditions aren't going to be your road conditions? And what if their journey isn't meant to be your journey? This brings me to something really important that I now want to talk about in the next section. And this is why taking these opinions at face value can be so dangerous for your own personal journey. Okay, so let's get into why we shouldn't take what people say at face value. So, okay, we understand this whole projection thing. I also just looked in my why am I out of breath? I also just looked in the Let Them theory book, and it was called Frame of Reference. So this is when people are taking their experiences and kind of projecting them onto your own. If you want to look more into that, please get the book. It's so amazing. And all right, so now that we understand this projection thing, that it's unconscious, let's talk about why taking other people's opinions at face value can truly throw us off our own special path. And I'll tell you, this is something that I see happening every single day. And again, I think we all know that friend or that person that always has their horror story ready. The one who, the moment you mention you're thinking about, again, starting your business, jumps in with, oh my gosh, I know somebody that failed, getting married. Oh my gosh, I think marriage is an old traditional thing. Why would you want to get married, right? Like, we know people like this, and then they share their stories. But again, I think what's fascinating and fascinating, I don't know, but I know that I learned this the hard way was that people love sharing their battle stories or honestly just their experiences in general. And I'll admit that, sometimes I catch myself being like, Maria, why do you need to share that? Like, why is it so important to throw your opinion out there? But it is like we just can't help it. Like, we want to share. And I think we need to face that we all like to talk about ourselves and insert unsolicited opinions into so many things. Honestly, this is also making me think of TikTok. Like, the amount of things that people have to say about X topic, like, never ceases to amaze me. We all have an opinion. And again, I'm very guilty of this sometimes. And what I do want to acknowledge is that I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't personally like it when you share something that you're excited about and people just start to tell you their horror story. I think that's personally ugly and so discouraging, and I don't do that. But hey, if that's what you like to do, like, okay. um, but I do think that I want to acknowledge that I do understand why we do this as humans because these experiences are real. They're valid for us, and they've shaped who we are as people. But and there's a really big but coming here. What we must remember is that when we are having these conversations and interactions with people, is that they are usually only telling us the highlight reel of their hardships. So I'm going to say that again. They are usually only telling you the highlight reel of their hardships. They are emphasizing the bad because, let's face it, as humans, the bad is what sticks out to us. The bad is what we remember. We're so terrible about remembering the bad and forgetting all the good, and we harp on the bad because it's much easier to be to be negative than positive. And I want you to think about it like this. When someone tells you about their car accident, they might tell you about the crash, the damage, maybe even their hospital stay, but they often leave out crucial details like they were texting while driving, or they hadn't changed their brake pads in a year, or they were rushing because they didn't leave for enough time to wherever they were going. I know this may sound like a very harsh truth, but these are super vital factors that play into our experiences, right? Like, yeah, we also have to acknowledge, and this is what I don't see a lot of people do, the responsibility we take for making these decisions as well. So, I want to share something a little bit personal here. For years, and actually for many years, I was very terrified of so many life experiences because I kept hearing and listening to all these nightmare stories. Again, marriage. I feel like all I heard was the divorce stories, all the breakups. Starting a business, oh my gosh, all the people that failed. Having children, oh my gosh, it takes away all your time, energy, and money. Like, this is all I was hearing and unfortunately feeding my mind. And I will not say everyone is doing that, but I know that I would allow these stories and conversations with people and even TV V is a big one. I needed to stop watching reality television. It was genuinely making me believe terrible things about relationships, I will fully admit. Like, this stuff played on my emotions, and again, I was seeking out information that would just prove this to be true, which confirmation bias at its finest. Um, but here's what I've learned after filling myself up with so much fear for all that time, and what I really want you to understand, because I noticed this extremely important pattern. And again, people often share their worst moments without sharing the full context. They don't tell you about maybe what their mindset was going in. Maybe they don't mention red flags they ignored. They don't talk about the choices they made. They didn't acknowledge trauma that they had that maybe subconsciously influenced things for them. Like, I am truly never cease to be baffled about how much I think our subconscious is affecting us and we have no idea. That's a total another thing. Don't want to get into it, but wow, I think about that a lot. And you know what? I get it. It's human nature. Think about it. When something doesn't work out, it's really hard to look in our rearview mirror and admit that maybe, just maybe, we played a part in our outcome that we didn't like. It's just so much easier to focus on those external factors, right? Like, oh, it's the bad economy. That's why I can't get a good job. Oh, my boss is terrible. That's why I'm so miserable when I go home every day and treat my spouse terribly. Oh, it's the unsupportive partner. We don't think like, oh, but what did I do wrong, right? So, again, I mean, let's be real. How many of us find it difficult to admit to ourselves that we ignored early warning signs, or that we didn't do our best at our job, or that we're not being loving towards the spouse that we're complaining about? It's tough stuff. And sometimes, again, we're not even conscious of this stuff until so much later. So, again, of course, we're sharing our stories with others. We might not mention this part, right? Not because we're trying to deceive anyone. I don't think we're trying to be like, I'm going to like lie about this story, but because acknowledging our role in our outcomes requires a level of self awareness and, quite frankly, vulnerability that honestly, many of us are still working on, myself included. And this is where it gets dangerous for us as listeners to these stories, because when we only hear these selective stories, these snippets of someone else's journey of what they're choosing to share with us without the full map of how they got there, again, we start building these mental roadblocks on roads we haven't even traveled yet. And I know that I do this, and I think so many people do as well. And I think what I had just want to be so clear is, do not allow yourself to become full of fear. And there's just so much fear everywhere. There's so much fear mongering, and we have to fight it. Like, this is just everywhere in our news, on social media, because I really think it holds us back and it keeps us scared. And again, so you have to truly ask yourself, why do I feel this way? And do I only feel this way because of all the fear around me? So, going back to my story about finishing college and deciding to move to Europe, there were a lot of people who told me things about moving abroad, like, oh my gosh, I know someone who got so lonely. Like, oh my gosh, what are you going to do for work? Like, oh my gosh, what do you mean you don't have a plan? And you know what? Some of the things that they said that were scary did happen when I came to Spain, and I did struggle with those certain things. But also, I needed to accept that this was a decision that I made and I was comfortable with it. And that even though some of those stories came true, it could be true, I was also a unique person that got to make my own decisions. And this was really a wake up call for me. And I realized that just because someone else's road trip might have ended in them breaking their car down, that doesn't mean my car will break down. So again, most importantly, I just want you to remember that someone else's getting lost doesn't mean you will. Their map isn't your map. Their vehicle isn't your vehicle. Their destination isn't your destination. And I think it's so important to build confidence with your own decisions and realize that you are living your freaking life, no one else. So make your decisions with confidence. So essentially, this now brings us something that I really want to talk about. And this is how to stay in your own driver's seat when everybody else is trying to navigate it for you. All right, so now that we've gone over projection, how other people's stories can affect us, let's talk about something that I think is a very liberating truth that I discovered in life. And I want to share it with you, which is really the premise of this whole podcast. But you are always in the driver's seat of your own life. And I mean, again, we just don't realize how much power and control we have. You really do have so much power and control in your life. And I really want you to think about that. Again, the premise of why I started this podcast. And, sometimes when I share this with people, they tend to push back a little and they're like, Maria, I don't understand. Like, but I can't control what happens to me. But you know what? When people do say this and kick back, they're partly right. You can't control what happens to you, of course. Like, we can't control the weather when it starts to rain. We can't control how other people are driving on the road. We can't control if there's construction ahead, but we can control so much more when we realize. So, for example, let's take this bad weather. Let's say you're driving and there's literally bad weather. You can't control it. But you know what you can control? You can control how you react to it. You can pull over and wait it out. You can slow down and proceed carefully. You can take an alternative route. You might not have chosen that weather, but again, you absolutely get to choose how you respond to it. Another example is, let's say you absolutely you hate your job. You can start updating your resume and you can start searching other jobs on LinkedIn and Indeed. You can start emailing people or other companies that you may want to work with. You can choose to maybe romanticize your work a little bit, and you hate going to the office, so get that coffee in the morning. You can choose to get yourself out of the situation. Now, that may not happen in a day, right? But honestly, if you do like all those things I said, especially the things of applying, updating your resume, probably within the next 6 months or a year, you can have a different job. So, again, stop thinking that you don't have control, because you do. And I remember, again, back when I was making my decision in college to come to España, everyone kept telling me how hard it would be, that, it would be lonely. Even though my family was very supportive, I don't think they understood either. And especially my professors and my cohorts, I know they thought I was just like taking this easy route and not going to grad school. And yeah, and there was a lot of risk. And honestly, like, the truth is, some of them like had right conclusions about the risks that I would be taking. And there were some lonely moments and everything. But what I have discovered is that I got to choose how I showed up for those challenges in my life when they came up. Like, they happened, I can't stop them from happening, but I got to choose how I showed up. And again, you get to choose how you show up, because how you react when life throws you a curveball. Okay, sorry. I want to go back. This is what I really want you to hear today if you don't take anything from this podcast episode, and that is that you get to choose. How you react when life throws you a curveball, you get to choose. Who you surround yourself with on your journey, you get to choose. What meaning you assign to your experiences, you get to choose. The attitude you bring to each day's drive, you get to choose. The habits you build, you get to choose. The goals you set, you get to choose. The location you live in, you get to choose. The pace you travel at, you get to choose. And something that I want to say is, you might not get these things right away, but if you put in action and you're constantly moving, oh, how I promise you, you will get them. And perhaps most importantly, you get to choose whose opinions you take on board and whose you let drive right on by. Because today we're talking about projections and what other people think. So again, I really want to be clear about something. Choosing to stay in your own driver's seat isn't always the easy choice, right? It isn't always to feel confident in your decision when everybody else thinks you're an idiot for making that decision. But sometimes it means going against the flow of traffic. Sometimes it means taking the road less traveled. And sometimes it means people won't understand your route. And that's okay. They don't need to understand. Let them not understand, and let me be confident in my own choice. Look at me. I'm applying my let them theory so well. But something that I've learned is being positive or optimistic isn't about pretending like everything is perfect, but it's not about ignoring the potholes in the road or the check light engine when it comes on. Because again, why I bring up this analogy is because let's say maybe somebody's being very negative with you and they think you're being super positive and naive about your decision. I don't look at it that way. I look at it in having confidence in my decision, but also acknowledging that yeah, like I said, a pothole might come up, it might get tough, but again, it's about knowing that whatever comes up on your journey, the hardship, you get to decide how to handle it. And I know that I've had to make a lot of decisions now that most people don't understand, choices that definitely went against the normal route. And you know what? Something that really helped me stay steady was remembering that I'm the one who has to live with the results of my choices, not my well meaning friends, not my parents, not my family members, me. I have to live my life every day. And it's not about being reckless or ignoring people's good advice if they are trying to give you good advice because they love you. I think it's about understanding that you can listen to other people's experiences while still choosing a different experience for yourself. And it's about having the courage to say to people, I hear your story. I respect your journey, but I need to find my own way because we all have a different path and we're all so incredibly unique. So, let's say people are throwing these opinions at you. You don't have to be ugly. Like I said, that's their experience. That's fair for them to feel that way because that is how they lived it. But respectfully, you can say, "But I'm different, and I'm going to make my own mistakes and whatever." So, again, your journey is so unique. Everyone's journey is so unique. And I just want you to feel confident in the decisions that you get to make. But I also don't want to take this as like you can just be disrespectful to what people say. So this brings me to something really practical because I like my podcast to be very practical, which is how do we actually do this? How do we stay in our own driver's seat when we have so many backseat drivers trying to tell us how to do it, where to go, and all the things? All right, so let's get into the practicality of it. I keep picking at my eye. I don't know if there's something in my eye. All right, so I want to get into the nitty gritty as I like to make sure all I talk about can be made practical and actionable for you because what's the point if you're not going to apply any of this? And something I've been doing a lot, especially like in the last 2 weeks, is I have been trying to create more self respect within myself and trust myself in every which way. And I have learned that when I show up for myself and act towards what I want, I have so much more respect for myself and I take myself very seriously. So, again, I want to share some practical tools that have helped me stay in my driver's seat when I feel like everybody else is trying to like grab the wheel or give their opinion from the back seat. And these, I want you to think of these as navigation tools for filtering advice and opinions and unsolicited advice and opinions that you're going to get. And the first tool I want to share with you is what I like to call the filter question. So this is simple, but it's powerful. And this question is this person is this person living a life that inspires you? And would you want to switch places with them? So let's make this super practical. When I was deciding about Spain, I noticed something interesting, and that is that the people who were the most negative about this choice that I was making were the ones that hadn't taken really any significant risk that I knew of in their life. Whereas the people who had moved abroad or who had moved far away from home were much more supportive and they told me like that things would come up and that I would be okay. So again, they had a completely different perspective and they were talking more from their experience and not fear. So I just found that very interesting. Again, use the filter question to gauge when someone's telling you something. Has their life inspired me and would I want to switch lives with them? And if the answer is no, respectfully, don't take their opinion. All right, the next one is called the context check. This is when someone shares their story or gives you advice. I want you to pause and ask yourself what might be missing from this picture? What choices did they make along the way? What was their mindset going in? A lot of times, again, we just take what people say at face value and we don't think about the things that may have affected what they're telling us about. Think of it like a traffic report. I know people don't look at these a lot, but if someone tells you, don't take that highway, it's always terrible, you might want to ask them, well, what time were you driving? Was that during rush hour? Did you look at any alternative routes? Because again, What was the context of the situation, right? Their context is probably going to be very different than your context. The third tool is the personal truth compass. If you want to learn more about this, please go check out my second episode where I dive so deeply into the truth and why I think that it is so important in your life. Probably the most important thing you can do, honestly, in your life. So, yeah. But this is about checking in with yourself. When someone gives you advice or shares their experience, I want you to notice, how does it literally land in your body? Does it feel like a warning sign? Does it feel like a warning sign worth considering? Or does it feel like somebody else's fear is just trying to become your own? Like, really think about why what they said affected you so deeply or didn't. Fourth thing, and I think this one's super crucial, is called the agency audit. This is when you hear someone else's story about why something didn't work out. You get curious about the choices involved, not to judge them, but to understand what parts were actually within their control and what parts weren't. I'm going to give you an example. People often told me horror stories about starting a business. But when I do my, let's say, when I do my agency audit, I noticed patterns about the people that were telling me this. And a lot of times I noticed they didn't do market research, or they quit their job without having any savings, or they ignored the early warning signs that were telling them maybe entrepreneurship wasn't for them. Like, they weren't just business failures, there were a series of choices that led to specific outcomes. So even though they were telling me like, well, their business failed, again, there was choices that they made that probably led to that outcome. And I don't want to say that disrespectfully, but there's a lot of truth in this. And finally, the last practical tool is what I call the wisdom filter. This is about distinguishing between experience-based wisdom and fear-based projection. So when someone shares advice, this is what I want you to think. Are they speaking from direct experience, or are they repeating someone else's stories? Are they acknowledging the role of personal choice and circumstances? Are they offering perspective or trying to make decisions for you? And are they sharing what worked for them, or insisting their way is the only way? Now, here's something super important about all these tools. Using these tools doesn't mean dismissing everyone's input. It's about being intentional with whose advice you want to take and whose advice you don't want to take. I've said this in my Truth podcast. Sometimes when we want something so much, I do think it's very important to go to someone that we trust and that we knows that loves us and that gives us their opinion, because we have blinders on, especially when we're so emotionally connected to somebody, right? I was listening to a podcast about this from a Secret Service agent, and she was saying this is why it's so easy for you to see someone's relationship on the outside and realize all the problems, but they can't see it because they're so emotionally involved and they have these blinders up. So again, I don't want you to take this as I'm not listening to what anybody has to say. No, it's about being wise with what you're going to listen to. So yeah. Again, think of it like this. When you're planning a road trip, you might look at multiple maps, check various weather routes, and ask friends who made a similar journey. This is very common, right? If somebody's doing something we want to do, we ask. But in the end, you decide which route you want to take. You decide when you get to start, when you get to finish, and you decide how you get to prepare. All that is left up to you. So, yeah, I want to get into my final thoughts about staying in your own driver's seat, and we will quickly do that now. All right, so before we end the podcast episode, I just want to always say thank you so much for being here. But a few final thoughts are that I want to leave you with, because I think they're so important, is that we have so much more freedom than we often remember. Freedom to see life differently, freedom to believe what rings true for us, not just what others tell us to believe, freedom to think for ourselves. And I want to say that there's often truth in what people tell us. Like, I don't want to say there's not truth in it. Like, we will face challenges. We might fail. Relationships might end. Businesses might struggle. But here is the thing, and this is where personal responsibility comes in. Again, we cannot allow others' projections to become our beliefs by default. We get to choose what we internalize and what we let go in one ear and out the other. And I want you just to personally think about how many beliefs you may be carrying right now that aren't even yours. How many fears you've borrowed from somebody else's stories, or how many limitations you've accepted because someone else hit a roadblock. Again, I think a lot of this is subconscious and we don't realize, but I really want you to think about things for yourself. So, this week I challenge you to notice when you're letting somebody else's journey write your story for your future. Pay attention to these moments when you feel fear about something that maybe you haven't even experienced yet, right? Like, ask yourself, is this my truth or is this somebody else's projection? So, yeah, I really, really want you to think about it if it's your truth or just somebody else projecting something onto you. All right, so we've made it this far, and I want to share a little bit about this podcast journey. Now that I launched my first 5 episodes, which I said in the beginning, which were my driver's ed series, we're going to be settling into a bi weekly rhythm. I wanted to launch my first 5 like all together week after week, but yeah, I want to do bi-weekly now because I have a whole other job and I actually have a whole nother handle where I talk about fashion. So I just think that also I really want to take the time to think about the topics that I wanted to discuss with you guys because I really want them to be meaningful, food for thought, and I want them to be intentional. And me doing one every week, I think would just be too much for me because again, I really want them to be good and I really want you to be able to take things away. So yeah. Now they're going to be coming out every 2 weeks. You can find them on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. So, yeah, I'm super excited for what's coming ahead. The final thing, as always, that I want to leave you with is that other people's experiences are like objects in your side mirror. They might appear larger, scarier, and more threatening than they really are. Hence the title of this podcast episode. Europeans may not get it since apparently, well, okay, Spanish people may not get it. I don't know because I did not see this little sign in their rearview mirrors, but whatever. But I always want you to remember that you're in your own car, you're on your own journey with your own GPS coordinates, and all that you have to do is have the courage to get in your car day after day and keep on driving. Thanks so much for being here. I will catch you in 2 weeks.